Thank you so much for being here, David. Thank you so much for being here, Gina. Vou falar em inglês, pessoal, para entender. Acho que todo mundo aqui entende inglês fluente. Gina is responsible for making Tumblr international, right? So her first project is Brazil. So she also speaks Portuguese. She's Brazilian, and she's living here for some time, making sure that Tumblr is going to be an even bigger phenomenon here. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. As David was saying, now more than half of our traffic is coming from abroad, and Brazil is our second largest community, about 12%. That means around 2 billion page views monthly just coming from Brazil. And actually the traffic is growing immensely, very quickly, and the users here are extremely creative. And so David and the rest of the team have decided to focus a little bit on internationalization, going beyond just the simple translation of the network, but also trying to understand each community really well so that we can get closer to our users, understand who are the bloggers who are talking about art and the people who are sharing photos of all kinds of stuff, and help people find relevant content. So I'm doing that here in Brazil with our international team at Tumblr, and then in several other countries as well, but this is definitely our focus right now.
Right. I want to open by reading a quote about Tumblr.
Oh, please.
This is on YouTube. After there's a video where we were talking at a national event, and the first comment, the one with most likes is, Tumblr is the only site where I actually post everything and anything that I feel. I actually am completely myself on Tumblr, whereas I'm not anywhere else. And I find it fascinating because you're talking so much about technology and culture and creativity and stuff like that. And it's almost like you are also anthropologists because you're going so deep into culture. Can you comment that? What's your take on that?
I mean, so I think it's really interesting that we've, you're right. I mean, I talk much more about the anthropology of this network than I do the technology, even though by background I'm an engineer. You know, I have no place to be talking about the communities or certainly creators, as I don't think I'm a very good one. But I think the reason that we were able to pull off something that I think is a place where people can really create identities they're proud of, really express themselves, is because it started very selfishly. This started as something that I and the people around me wanted to do, and we found ourselves really unserved by these other tools. So it was easy. This wasn't a big cultural experiment for me. This wasn't a stroke of brilliance. Even this was really me thinking about what I actually wanted, what I wasn't getting out of the other tools. And what I wasn't getting out of the other tools was, that the best tools, the tools that were the most compelling, were also the most limited, were the places where I couldn't really be myself. So, Facebook today, incredible technology. Everybody gets the same vanilla white Facebook page. Now it's like light blue, but it's like the same freaking thing that we're all kind of stuck with. And I wanted more than that, and I was aspiring to have something online that really represented me. So for me, it was more of a math problem. I was able to work backwards from what is it that I want, what's the feature set, what's the, first from what is it that I actually want out there, what else is there, what are the features from that I want, and what's the kind of feature set and platform underneath that would let that work. So Tumblr was much more of a discovery process than it was, a vision for, the way the world should work.
Nice. Talking about creation, in the beginning, did you guys look for creators to use to artists and stuff like it? How did it happen? For example, maybe only teenagers might be using the tool. That's not the case. Maybe only brands might be using the tool, or celebrities, but that's not the case. There's this really strong connection with creativity. And how did you work towards that direction? Was it by chance, or did you have a strategy? How did it work out?
I won't say that we had. I don't think we were a little bit clever, but I don't think we had a very developed strategy about targeting creators. I can actually tell you, because we were very deliberate in how we launched Tumblr. And one of the reasons that I think we were kind of clever at this, why we were pretty good at this, was I'd done this a few times before. So I showed you my consulting company, Davidville. Well, a lot of the projects we were doing were things, were new programs that we launched from scratch. And very often we'd be involved in releasing those new products and getting those products the attention and press that they deserved. So at that point I was pretty good. This was 2005, 2006. We launched Tumblr in early 2007. there was Dig, there was TechCrunch, there were a bunch of these things that we kind of knew how to work all of them. We knew how to get something on the front page of Dig. We knew, some writers at TechCrunch. We kind of knew how this stuff worked. Interesting, we knew the bloggers that like to write about technology and stuff like that. So we'd done this stuff before. We were very deliberate in how we would roll things out. When we launched Tumblr, we had a really interesting community to start with, because I showed you before that Tumblr community, these people, these avant-garde bloggers who were already doing stuff like this. We went to them first. We went to them and said, hey, we built a tool for the first time that makes it easy for people to do this, even if they're not hackers, even if they don't know Rails or Python and can build these things from scratch. We've got a new service that'll let people try it. And the people who were hacking those tools together were flattered. They said, oh my God, this is so neat. You've kind of validated this new format that we've been experimenting with. And they wrote about it. They blogged about it. And then their audiences, the communities around them, who maybe weren't the hackers who could do it on their own, but had been following these guys, who knew what the format was, who'd been excited about this new kind of avant-garde medium, were throwing up their arms going, oh my God, we can finally try it. We can do it for the first time. So they signed up. They knew what the format was all about. They were ready to go. They jumped on there, and they were immediately really pushing the capabilities of Tumblr, doing some really interesting stuff. So from the first week, and in those first 2 days, we had 75,000 users that came out of just that community. We didn't tell anybody else. We just went straight to that community. They signed up. They knew exactly what Tumblr was trying to do, and they used it sort of perfectly. They were sort of perfect representation of what we were trying to build in Tumblr. And with that early community, well, I should say, that was one of the really lucky, just stupid, lucky things here that happened for us was that was a very design-minded community. They knew how to, they knew that what was special about Tumblr was not even the tool set, but the fact that the tools allowed for this very unique presentation of media. So they from the very beginning, were hacking it apart to create these beautiful themes, creating very rich media, real diversity of media. We're using it in very interesting ways. So then from there, when we got the link on the front page of Dig, when we got an article on TechCrunch, when we got a video interview on Lifehacker and the stuff started to proliferate, we had this core community of people who were using it so well and so beautifully that all of the next people's first impression of Tumblr was a community that valued design, that valued kind of diversity, that was incredibly creative, and so it sort of selected for more and more creative people. So that's the part that was sort of an accident. That's the part where I feel really lucky. But the rollout of Tumblr was pretty deliberate, where we were able to kind of take it around and show it off to the right people and get it more and more attention. But it just sort of snowballed as this group of incredibly creative people. Something I'm really grateful for.
It's nice, man. Really nice. I was listening to you and thinking about how designers and artists were really a big part of the community to make it all happen. And I know that Brazil usually goes crazy with social media, goes crazy and starts creating new stuff and going wild. For example, here we have lots of Tumblrs which works towards memes, these crazy, humoristic ideas. And sometimes they're beautiful, sometimes they're just funny and horrible and stuff like that. Do you worry about Brazilian effect on Tumblr? Is it something that you worry about, or do you consider it something nice and welcome? Do you have any special take on that? Does it even make sense, this kind of question? Because Brazil is really, it goes crazy.
So this was, so we had two concerns from the very beginning, actually. So one was just, and this is not relevant, just to be clear, this is a different bucket, but just negativity seeping its way into the community, right? So more than like, more than the network becoming all about memes or about humor or all about music. Just the worry that, like a lot of these big networks, you see YouTube hit a scale, you see Twitter hit a scale, and all of a sudden they start to become very hostile places. You see kind of nasty people show up with kind of just just really nasty, negative interactions. That was something that we thought about very much from the very beginning, and have tried to design ways to keep the community as positive a place as possible. As far as certain genres of content, so as far as it becoming all fashion or all music, this is something that you also see where Pinterest started as a tool, as a generic bookmarking tool, because the community that caught on to it happened to be these Midwestern moms. It's all just sort of girly shit now, right? So you go on Pinterest and search for motorcycles and you see a bunch of cupcake recipes. You see Reddit, which was supposed to be a generic tool for discovery on the internet, and it's all today just atheism and memes, right? You see, I'm trying to think of other examples of this. Anyway, so you see these things kind of become microcultures And we were very worried about, one of the things from the beginning that we really loved about Tumblr was all of these communities were represented. Oh, MySpace is a good example, right? MySpace, which started as a social networking site, ended up being, the music community rather than this generic rather than everybody being represented. So what we loved about Tumblr from the very beginning was everybody was represented. There was film, there was fashion, there was music, everybody was there. And we didn't want to lose that. And we were really, cautious of, what happens if you go to Tumblr and like Pinterest, it's all one thing, and if you're not into that thing, then you just leave. So, we tried to, I can't say that we've been so smart at this, but we've tried to make a lot of decisions that make Tumblr, allow these communities to coexist. And, I think we've even done it to a fault, because today, Tumblr is sort of an obtuse network. When you come to Tumblr, it's hard to just search and find exactly what you're looking for. It's hard to show up on Tumblr and even figure out what it's about. But when you find it, when your friend links you to a blog, when you go to your friend's blog, when you find a link on Facebook or on Twitter or on Google that points you to some blog on Tumblr, you might end up connecting with a community that's perfect for you. That might be exactly what you're into. That might be the exact street style that you like. It might be the humor that you like. It might be the photography that you like. And if you find it, you end up going down this rabbit hole of just perfect, I don't know what you call it, perfect media, just like-minded people who are into exactly the same things that you care about, exactly the same things that you value. So when it works, it's magical, even though it's a little hard to find it. But by being hard to find, by not being just the YouTube top list or the Pinterest front page or the Reddit front page, these communities are sort of protected. And you even hear from users who, we've met a few people in Brazil who thought we were an American company building just for Brazil. They didn't even know that we had users in the US. I met people who in the music community or the film community who thought Tumblr was just for film. I met people in the gay and lesbian community who thought Tumblr was just a network for gays. It's just like it really covers everything. Because these networks, because these communities can kind of exist in these little pockets, occasionally they rub up against each other, occasionally they touch, and you have like the photography community and the fashion community overlapping in interesting ways. You have the creative writing and the poetry communities overlapping in interesting ways. They can definitely touch, but they can also coexist pretty happily in their own little corners. And when we look at this big expansive network on Tumblr today, we see these little pockets of community that seem to coexist very happily. So as a long way to answer your question, my hope is that all of these communities that show up, whether or not that's geography, whether or not that's the Philippines or Australia or Brazil showing up and becoming a big part of our network, or the fashion people showing up and becoming a big part of our network, the music people showing up and becoming a big part of our network, all of these communities can coexist and can coexist happily in one big ecosystem. So far it's working. We have a lot of work to do to protect that, but my hope is that everybody can live here.
People ask me a lot about politização all the time. I know it's a very strong Brazilian concern because the feeling is that Brazilians are coming onto these networks and adopting it and then ruining it and leaving. That's our reputation, and I think for all the reasons that David said, I think Tumblr is a platform where everybody is welcome, and we're going through a phase in Brazil where internet is becoming more and more prevalent and more accessible across the country. So even people who are extremely poor and may not have the most basic necessities are going to LAN houses to use social networks and using Twitter. And so it's a growing pain, I think, for us in Brazil, but it's also a very classist point of view, unfortunately, right? That is that once certain people that you don't want there are on a network, they're putting things on there that you don't want or that are making the platform uglier or less pleasant. I think that on one hand, as David was saying, Tumblr is a place where you can just follow whoever interests you, and if someone doesn't interest you, you just don't follow them, so you don't have the obligation to be friends with someone like you are on Facebook, for example. On the other hand, it also, I think, encourages people who have a lot to say and maybe are just learning how to express themselves or haven't had the opportunity to express themselves and show their artwork and share their pieces of writing from all over the country, from whatever social background. It's allowing people from cities to gain access to art and literature created by people all over the country. And so I really hope that this vision of what utilização is you know, it's just a phase for us, and that we're able to recognize that there are a lot of people out there who have a lot of interesting things to say, and it's just a matter of format. And luckily, because David and the team focus so much on design and the themes, I think it's very, very difficult to make your Tumblr really ugly. So you have to be really good at coding to completely trash it. And so people who are going to trash it are probably not very good at coding. So.
All right. Tumblr is a lot about creation and curating. And as you were saying, I believe that people are still learning how to properly curate content on the web. It's very common when you listen to someone say, oh, the web is getting bad, it's getting worse. The web is not getting worse. Maybe the way you create content is getting worse. Maybe you are not choosing the content that you want to see. People are having a tough time. Well, maybe you have a friend here in the audience, and you hate that guy's Tumblr or Facebook, but you feel kind of bad if you don't follow him or stuff like that. And I also want to make a connection of that with the creation aspect. You need creators. Are you somehow teaching people how to better create and how to better curate?
Better do any of this stuff is kind of funny to me. You know, I hope that the tools I hope the tools that we're putting out there make it effortless. I hope there is no learning curve. I hope that you can simply show up and you know, we can do better and better at this, and you know, we try and do better and better at this. But my hope is that when you show up on Tumblr, it's fairly intuitive how to create something on the service. You know, that was a lot of the original premise was you show up on WordPress and you get a big empty box. Like, what the hell do I do with this big empty box? You show up on Tumblr and there's a button for photo, there's a button for video. And you see, oh, somebody just posted a funny video they watched on YouTube. Oh, I just watched this video. You know, I gave it to my dad who emails me all this crap all the time. And I'm like, you should just have a blog, just put it on the blog, and so I don't have to read all of your emails. I'll go look at your blog every now and then. And he gets it, you know, he's like, oh, all right, I'll take my weird videos and I'll put them up there. When I hear a joke, I'll put it up there as a quote post. And you know, hopefully it's fairly intuitive and there isn't a steep learning curve for the tools. What I think, you know, I think the sort of self-reinforcing behavior of, you know, how to be a better creator or curator, you know, I mentioned there in that sort of shape of our network, the creators, the curators, and the audience, they all have different ways they sort of measure their success. And there are a lot of positive feedback tools built into Tumblr, right? So one of the things I hate, it sounds like I really don't like YouTube. I actually really like YouTube, but one of the things I really don't like about it is how much negativity there is. You put something up there and you're called, you know, a fat ass, you're called an asshole, you're called whatever, you know, there's a lot of negativity rather than constructive feedback. Tumblr, there's some constructive feedback, but mostly there's just positivity. So when you do something good on Tumblr, when you show up with something great that people respond to, you get a lot of likes, you get reblogs, you can get this big audience, and actually one of the cool sort of secrets of Tumblr is you can show up, often it's a brand new user who shows up with something new and innovative, who's our most popular user that day. Somebody who shows up with something great, gets reblogged like crazy, gets spread out into the network, and drives all this attention and interest. That feedback they're getting is really all positive. You know, they're watching the notes on their post go up, they're watching followers get racked up. That means that people get guided towards the things that the network values, that the community values. And you know, you don't need to do that by voting them down and making them feel like jerks. You can do that by rewarding them when they're doing stuff that people really enjoy. The really cool thing is there's so many interests on Tumblr that even the kind of obscure, wacky stuff that people are doing sometimes finds an audience that resonates with them. Yes. And you know, it's very often enough for people to know that there are 5 people out there who like the same stuff that they do. Some people, they want millions of people to like the stuff that they do, and they'll figure out how to craft their craft so that they tap those millions of people. But you know, it's all kind of positive reinforcement, and I think it kind of organically guides creators to be successful, not just on Tumblr, but you know, to find success in the world.
I also think curation has become a form of creation, especially on Tumblr. You know, people yes. are starting to create and pick out the things that most matter to them, and they're gaining relevance in the network. And people are following them because they think they are good guides to what's good in fashion or what's good in art. An example of this is Neonico, who's curated by Theo, who was working with us now, and he started picking out the best in male fashion and created this whole network that became a reference for male fashion. So I think, yes, there are people who are doing a great job curating, but that's in any network. And people who are doing a great job curating are getting a lot of positive feedback, getting a lot of new followers. And in a certain way, it's like like a newspaper, like a magazine, where if you're reading a magazine and you don't like the articles that are being picked by the editors, then you'll just read another magazine. So people are not learning that way, but selecting the best curators in that fashion, and people are learning what it means to be a good curator and how that's a form of creativity.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
All right, makes sense. I want to talk a little bit about business, on the business side. On your take, what companies and what brands have been making an outstanding use of Tumblr? Considering big companies, medium companies, and even small-sized companies, what have you been seeing that you could share with the audience?
So, I mean, in general, the first thing to know is that we're not inventing any of these use cases. So it's not like we sit down with these guys and say, oh, here's how we want brands to be using Tumblr. What's actually happening was, we didn't even have much of a vision originally for how these brands would use Tumblr. But as they've shown up, and we've seen a few very creative brands do really meaningful, valuable stuff on Tumblr. Valuable for our users, things our users like, but also things that really create value for those brands. We just take lots of notes, and then when we go and talk to other brands, we try and relay some of those notes. So we're really just learning this ourselves and following the really creative brands. Most of those use cases, though, I would generally describe as creatively applying the unique resources to that organization. So an example of that would be a company like College Humor. So I don't know if College Humor is big in Brazil, but hugely popular in the US. You have this team of creators putting out these hilarious videos, really hilarious works. And their fans adore them and can't get enough, really can't get enough. So when College Humor started putting out these blogs of everything behind the scenes, so it was literally like interns who were just taking photos around the office, posting little bits of the videos being made, just stupid little in-between jokes, just like the nonsense that kind of happens behind the scenes. The super fans of College Humor now had an extra channel to further engage with this brand, to fall even more in love with the people behind this brand. And all it took was just giving an intern a camera and letting them do some stuff behind the scenes. Another unique resource is, when an organization is sitting on top of a whole wealth of media that maybe it doesn't normally make its way out into the public. So a good example of this recently is the New York Times has these archives. They're in a basement in Midtown in New York City, just files and files of old photographs, of journalists' notes, of film reels, all of these things, and they were just sitting there. They started the Lively Morgue blog on Tumblr, where they started do these great high-res scans of the items in the archives with notes from the archivalists, whatever they're called, with the notes from the people working in the archives, with these great high-res scans of both sides of whatever they were putting up there. So it was the journalist's notes. Even if the other side was blank, they would scan both sides, so on Tumblr you could flip the image around to see, kind of just to really get a tactile sense of what these things were. But I mean, the really clever thing, though, is that they, again, took these things they had sitting around, stuff that they already had access to, and just kind of raised them to the surface. And now what happens is the super fan, the people who were already really invested in the New York Times, now have a new channel to further engage with the New York Times through. And the people who are maybe lightly interested, I don't read the New York Times every day, I'm like lightly interested, I definitely read some of their stuff, but now all of a sudden I'm following the New York Times on Tumblr. I've now got this extra attachment to this organization, to their reporting, to this brand that I wouldn't have otherwise had. Total different end of the spectrum would be Lionsgate with the Hunger Games. I don't know if there are any Hunger Games fans in the audience, but they showed up on Tumblr, and rather than just registering hungergames.tumblr.com, they decided to explore their unique resource, which was this fantasy world in these books that their fans were obsessed with, but also had some really interesting kind of creative elements that were appealing not just to people who had read the book and were fans of the book, but in this case, the fashion world, right? So they had this incredibly strong fashion sense. They had the real designers who were working on the costumes for the film. They showed up on Tumblr not with just HungerGames.tumblr, they started CapitalCouture.tumblr, a fashion blog that had some of the most interesting, I mean, it's truly some of the most innovative fashion around, because literally they're getting the real designers to design fashion to be set hundreds of years in the future.
The Hunger Games is jogos vorazes, you know.
Okay. So, thank you. So, you know, through that, got to give their super fans a chance to really explore to further explore the world of the Hunger Games, but now putting out content that also hooks the fashion community that might not have been readers of the Hunger Games, might not have known that they should care about it, but are now hooked on this, you know, incredible world of fashion coming out of this film. So, you know, the real, to me, the element that kind of connects all of these things is exploring the unique elements of, or I should say the unique resources of these organizations, of these brands, whatever they are, and finding ways to harness those to create content, to create media that's really interesting to not only the super fans, but the people who might not have otherwise cared. You know, one of the first brands to really have success on Tumblr was Newsweek. And I wasn't a Newsweek reader, but you know, the editor showed up, and they had such strong editorial sensibilities that they were able to apply that to our community in a way that everybody got excited about. I've been following Newsweek on Tumblr now for 4 years. Now when I go to the airport, that's one of the first magazines I pick up because I'm invested in the, you know, the editors, the people behind that brand. That's a pretty powerful thing that brands are able to do.
Another thing I think is really important, and my microphone died, so I'm going to scream, I think it's really important, in addition to that, to understand what kind of community it is that you're talking to on Tumblr. You know, so brands are more and more just trying to adopt all kinds of social media out there and be first and be on there. And I think it's really important to understand what the nature of the community is like and how you can use it to the brand's advantage. So something, I think a really good example of that in the US is the NPR, which is a public radio. And something that I think is fascinating about them is that instead of just posting stories like they usually would and talk about news stories they have, they use the actual culture of Tumblr, and they take, for example, memes and images that are being shared around that are popular on Tumblr to communicate with their audience. And I think that's in particular very relevant for Brazil, because as you said, memes here are particularly notorious. People here love humor, and I think maybe the easiest way for brands right now is just to identify what those popular memes are right now, what people are talking about, what people are sharing, and understand how they can incorporate that into their language to reach people on Tumblr in a really relevant way. And another example I really like is Olympus. It's a little bit more, you know, marketing focused rather than content focused. But they did this one promotion where they took and they gave cameras to people on Tumblr, recognizing that people on Tumblr are creators and they want to share things and it's very visual. And they said, here's some cameras. The only thing I ask is put the pictures you're taking back on Tumblr to share how great our camera is and what kinds of images that they can produce. And it was extremely successful. So. Yeah, in particular, I'm really excited for Brazilian examples. I hope people start doing really exciting things soon so that I can start showing the gringos what awesome things we can do too here. And I don't have to keep showing American